Talk today about how to be a good listener. Now, we're not so much talking about in class and all that, because you guys are already good at that, right? Okay. But we're going to talk about what if a friend came to you. Okay? A friend came to you with a problem and said, this thing has happened to me. What are the kinds of things that you can do to be a good listener? And so we're going to end up maybe with 18 or 20 suggestions on what do you do to be a good listener? And some of this comes from my background in psychology. Other parts of it come from my own experience at working at a crisis clinic, crisis center. And I've worked at 3 of them over the years, okay? And so let's go through and see what's happening. So let me give you a scenario to think about, okay? This is not one that I wish on you, but one that could happen. A friend of yours texts you, and you look and it says, call me now, okay? And you call up and you go, what's going on? And you can hear your friend crying or upset, or you know there's something going on, and your friend said, something terrible has happened. And you go, what? And your friend says, my father just died. I'm like, what do I do? What do I say? You know, how do I be this friend that, you know, I've always tried to be, but, you know, what do I do to really help this person out? Okay. So that's what I'm going to take you through. You know, how do you, or maybe your friend's brother has alcohol problems, or, you know, your friend's sister just ran away from home or whatever, or your friend broke up with their boyfriend or girlfriend. Any of these kinds of problems, it's how can you really be there, you know, as a good friend, okay? All right, so let's go through it. First one is, and most of you know this and do this anyway, is you show you care, right? And so this is a theme that's going to trickle through the rest of this, that there are all kinds of ways to show you care, but that's an important one, okay? And you know nothing. You care for your friend, you care what's going to happen, you know, that's first and foremost. Second, to be a good listener, it's important that you work on being able to do this. Right? To shut your mouth, okay? Because guess what? You know, here they have the problem. And, you know, I get paid to lecture, so it's easy for me to talk a lot. And some of you probably talk a lot anyway, right? And you think, oh, here's how I got to help this person out. And maybe you know some things about it. Suddenly, you know, so your friend calls you and says, we just found out that my aunt has breast cancer, okay? And you're going, oh, my aunt had breast cancer last year, and you're suddenly like, no, okay? Your job is, in fact, to do something like, you know, less than 40% of the talking. And I just made up that number, you know. We can say 50% or 30% or whatever, okay? If you're doing more than 50% of the talking, then you're probably not being a good listener, okay? And so that's a tough one, but an important one, to let them do more of the talking, okay? It's their problem. They got all this stuff going on. You ask questions and then, you know, let them, you know. So I'm not saying shut your mouth and don't say anything. I'm saying, sure, you're going to talk to them and, you know, you're going to have a conversation back and forth, but, you know, kind of let them fill those airwaves. And then related to that is permit, and then I'm going to put a word in here, permit silence, but sometimes we can even call it awkward silence, okay? Certainly part of being a good listener. And years ago I heard someone say, you don't have to fill the airwaves with sound. But not having sound is kind of awkward. So what I'm going to do for a moment is I'm just going to be silent just to kind of give you a sense of what, you know, what silence feels like, okay? So how long was that? You're like, most of it's too long, right? After 14 seconds, you're going, okay, I got it. You know? After 23 seconds, all right, come on, let's go, right? Okay. That was 65 seconds of silence, okay? But it's like, oh. But I wanted you really to experience that because it felt awkward, right? I mean, it felt like, okay, come on, let's say something, okay? But you don't have to be talking all the time. And so there will be times when you're interacting with your friend who has this problem, and your job is just to be there, okay? Just to sit with them. Because you don't know in the next second, in the next few seconds, that that friend is going to tell you something that they've never said to anybody. And maybe as you're sitting there in silence, your friend goes, you know, I want to tell you something. And you go, what? And your friend might say something like, you know what, the death of their father. I think I killed my father. And you're going, what? What do you mean? Well, a few days ago, he started having some pain in his left arm and left shoulder area. And I thought it was just, you know, from doing something. I didn't know. And then I realized now that that was the beginning of his heart attack. And I should have Googled it. I should have looked it up. I should have said something to him. You know, and then he died. I mean, I knew this. With me? We're talking guilt here, which we're going to talk about a little later. And your tendency is to want to say, well, don't feel guilty, or you didn't do that, or, right? You know, guess what? Your job is then. Another one is to don't interrupt. We know that. That's what a good reader, you know. And they go, oh no, come on, let me go. And here you are doing a bunch of talking, trying to talk this person out of it. Or, you know, they tell you about their aunt with breast cancer, and you jump right in and you tell your 8-minute story of your aunt who has breast cancer. Okay, it's their turn. Okay, and the emphasis and the focus is back on them. Okay, and so another related one that goes along with this is don't judge. Now, how do we know when we're judging? Well, there's some words that will show up that indicate judgment, okay? And the words like when we say you should, you must, you need to. How many of you know a little bit about American Sign Language? Buddy? Okay, right? You probably know that this is the term for you should, you need, you must. And look at it, it's like a hook coming down on somebody, right? Like, yeah, that's what's going on. And so, years ago there was a psychologist named Wayne Dyer, and he's written some books, and he's been on PBS over the years. And he's the first one I ever heard him say that when you say this to somebody, you're shoulding all over them. Okay? Think about that, okay? And then he came up, when you're doing this one, you are masturbating this person, all right? So think about it next time, you know, because what you're saying to your friend is, you shouldn't feel guilty, okay? You shouldn't do that. And, you know, guess what? It's your judgment. So I'll give you an example of this. I call it the $3 million example. Let's say you met a guy 6 months ago or so, and he became a friend of yours, and then he called you last week and said, you won't believe this. I won $3 million. And you're really happy for this guy and say, well, good for you. And then he calls you last night. He says, something terrible has happened. You go, what? He says, I lost $1 million. Well, let's just say it's gone, right? Now, what do you logically, let's say, you know, whatever reason, you can't get it back, it's gone. What do you logically feel like saying to him at this point?
You still have 2.
What?
You still have 2.
Yeah, you still got $2 million, right? So make a little note here that if you're dealing with someone who's experiencing a loss, if you begin this sentence with the words "at least," you're in trouble. Now, as you know, some of the community work I do is I work with parents whose children have died, okay? And, you know, that's a tough group. And, you know, you get a lot of guilt and so on. And over the years, I have looked into the eyes of thousands of parents whose children have died. And they get all kinds of cliches and stories, and, you know, they hope that people will be good listeners to them. But one of the things that I hear is, here's a mom. She had 3 kids. One died. Well-meaning people said to her, guess what? Please, you have 2, right? Does she go, oh, well, thank you very much. I guess I feel much better. Okay, right? So what's going on here? Why are we doing this? Because our brain doesn't like what? Pain. Doesn't like pain, right? And when you stand in front of someone who tells you a story of tragedy, your brain is dancing around like, give me something here to make it feel better, right? Let me find this silver lining, okay, right? And so, at least then, at least. Now, if they say at least I have my 2 other children and I'm, I feel that I'm so thankful for them, that's very different. But for you and I to come along and somehow make this better in our own mind by coming up with this at least, it just doesn't help. And their parent, moms and dads that told me they want to strangle someone who, who's saying things like this, okay? All right, so, watch your judgment, because they're going to watch you closely in terms of how you, maybe someone comes and tells you that they're addicted to drugs, okay? And you go, I can't believe that. How stupid can you be? What an idiot. How can you, right? Well, then you've lost them, okay? And instead, there's a lot of other things you can do at that point, but they're going to watch your face. And remember that term that we talked about with a facial expression? Anybody remember that term? What's it called? Green spoon effect, right? Where, you're going to go, oh man, you are sick, right? Well, guess what? Then you've lost them, okay? Another one is to watch for what are called cliches, right? We often think at times that if we give them, a sentence or 2 that'll help them understand, okay? So we say things like, when they tell you some tragedy has happened, you go, well, it was God's will, okay? Right? Now, in the past, the clergy have sometimes done this, an imam, a priest, a rabbi, a minister, pastor, who says, well, I guess it was God's will, And at that moment, many people are sometimes a little ticked off at God, especially if a significant tragedy has occurred in their life. So saying something like that may be of comfort to you, but guess what? At that moment, that may not certainly be, okay? Or, here's one of my favorites that I think we've talked about before, where people, hear something happen and they go, well, I know this has happened to you, but I happen to believe that everything happens for a reason. How many of you heard of that one before? Everything happens for a reason. Now have we talked about this in here? Okay, no? You may absolutely believe that everything happens for a reason. But you with me? Here you are trying to lay it on them. And I challenge you to look into the eyes of a mother whose child has died in a car accident, or a child who hung him or herself, or a brother or sister who died tragically, and say, well, everything happens for a reason. To hold that mother or sister being held back from strangling you for say something like that, okay? So again, it kind of goes along with judgments. But so God can only give you as much as you can handle, or you'll move on with life, or whatever sort of things we do. And again, it kind of goes back to our brain, kind of wanting to somehow make things better. And you know what? You can't. Your best friend's father dies. You're not going to be able to fix that. In fact, there's no magical words that you're going to be able to say where they're going to go, oh, okay, thanks a lot, I guess I feel better now.